Sterling came up with an extraordinary scheme. They would persuade the British government to sell the brand new Lightning fighter to the Saudis, along with an entire defence network. And Sterling's team of ex-SAS men would help to run it. Saudi Arabia would be protected, and Britain would maintain its influence in the Middle East.
Well, the arms deal was brokered by Geoffrey Edwards and David Sterling, and the package would involve British planes, British training for the pilots, British training and, in the start, maintenance for the aircraft, and ground control, radar, and everything else. We were there prepared to give a training support, and we had already shown, in Yemen and other things, that we had been a capability of doing it.
In a private way?
In a private way.
They wanted aircraft, radar, training, and guided weapons. The Lightning was an extremely sophisticated fighter aircraft, supersonic, the first British supersonic fighter aircraft developed by English Electric, and they wanted this. They wanted the very latest type of fighter aircraft, and they wanted the latest type of radar. And of course there were all sorts of security problems. The attitude of the embassy in Saudi Arabia was very lukewarm. This was gaining influence through trade. The Foreign Office had not been involved in trade. It was thought to be slightly below the salt trade. Diplomacy was tip-top.
But Dennis Healey was in favour of the deal. It was a perfect example of what he wanted the Ministry of Defence to achieve. He gave it official government support. But Sterling and Edwards were facing serious opposition from the Americans. The Lockheed Corporation were trying to sell the Saudis their Starfighter instead. They produced slick commercials to show off the plane. They also took the precaution of hiring an agent in Saudi Arabia, Adnan Khashoggi. He told Lockheed that the only way to win the deal was to bribe the Saudi government. 10 years later, in a Senate investigation, Lockheed's chairman admitted what had happened.
I'd like to ask Mr. Cowden this question. Did Mr. Khashoggi inform you personally that if Lockheed was to obtain contracts in Saudi Arabia, public officials there in a position of influence would have to be paid off?
The answer to the question is yes. He has told me on several occasions that it was necessary for him to make payments to Saudi officials, government officials.
Sterling and Edwards told the British government they would have to do the same as the Americans, pay commission to their agents in King Faisal's entourage. If they didn't, Britain would lose the deal. Did you pay commissions to get this deal?
We paid commissions to our agents, yes.
Did you think that was wrong?
No. The agent lays out a lot of his own money, and if the deal doesn't go through, he loses his money. On that basis, I think it's a fair way of working. I knew some of the things that went on in Saudi Arabia, of course, that payments were made to people. I would not call them bribes, they were payments, a cut on the deal for people who were involved in it, and that was the custom of the country. They have different ethical standards to ourselves. For instance, people in Saudi Arabia have lots of different wives. We don't have that in this country, but it isn't a good reason for failing to do business with them.
When the British government accepted the principle of commissions being paid, it was looking the other way on an act of corruption. They knew this was corruption, but they thought of it in terms of this is Middle East corruption. This is the way things are done in the Middle East. And I would have dared anyone at the time to tell Sterling that he was not behaving honorably. He believed he was behaving honorably. You could accuse him of a certain level of naivety, but you could not doubt his honor in terms of serving the purposes of Britain. But the activity is, by nature, corrupt.
In December 1965, the Saudis announced they would buy the British planes. The bribes had worked. It was the biggest export deal in Britain's history, and King Faisal came on a state visit to celebrate it. It was also the beginning of the modern arms trade with the Middle East, which has grown to dominate Britain's economy. And from it also came a much wider commercial relationship with Saudi Arabia.
It gave us a great leverage in. It brought a lot of Britons in at a time when there were very, very few, and a lot of things came along as byproducts of this particular deal. Deals for hospitals, deals for all sorts of things, deals for building roads, deals for building palaces, deals for building airfields. It all came as a byproduct, a major, major, major byproduct. So this £100 million arms sale came to be worth billions in terms of trade for Britain, and also it maintained our influence there to this present day.
By the early 70s, Sterling had become a successful businessman. He arranged enormous arms deals, and his mercenaries kept many Third World leaders in power. Almost single-handedly, Sterling had created the foundations of Britain's modern, privatised foreign policy. It is a hidden world of vicious guerrilla wars fought by British mercenaries, a world that occasionally surfaces in scandals like the Sandline affair. It all began with Sterling selling Britain's military power to countries he approved of.
As long as these countries were friendly countries, where there was no conflict between Sterling, the ultimate expression of Britishness, and the policies of that country, he was certainly willing to provide his services in terms of buying arms, in terms of training, in terms of undertaking missions, actually. He was a man of many parts, a dynamo, a very likable man. So he was acting in a private capacity, but he was acting in cahoots with the British government. There's no doubt about it.
And that was new.
That was new for a private person, yes, yes.
But then, in the early 70s, Sterling had a terrible car crash in the Scottish Highlands. He nearly died and spent a long time recovering at his family estate, Keir, in Scotland. Sterling was forced to give up all his mercenary activities and his arms dealing. He went into semi-retirement. His crusade to keep Britain powerful seemed to be over.
As Prime Minister, I want to speak to you simply and plainly about the grave emergency now facing our country. In the House of Commons this afternoon, I announced more severe restrictions on the use of electricity. We are limiting the use of electricity to 3 days a week. The reason why is quite simple. The problem of the supply of oil and the problem of the rise in the price of oil. Jobs will be in danger and take-home pay will be less. In terms of comfort, we shall have a harder Christmas than we have known since the war.
The price of oil had been massively increased as a result of the Arab-Israeli war. The oil-producing states, led by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, were furious at American support for Israel. Their action had catastrophic effects on the Western economies.
Doesn't this new massive increase in the price of oil mean a change in the world balance of power between the developing nations like you, the producers, and us, the developed, industrialized nations?
Yes, it will.
And what do you think arises from that?
Well, a new type of relationship. You have to adjust yourself to the new circumstances. And I think you have to sit down and talk seriously with us about this new era.
In 1974, David Sterling came back to Mayfair. He found it completely transformed. It had become the social centre for the oil-rich Arabs. And the Claremont Club had changed too. It had been taken over by the Playboy organisation, and they allowed Arabs in for the first time.
When I took over at the Claremont Club, Arabs had been excluded from